The barn door hung crooked on its hinges. Mercy Ashford pushed it open with her shoulder, her hands shaking too badly to grip the handle properly. Dawn was still an hour away. The valley held onto the darkness like a fist, and the only light came from a lantern she had stolen, or perhaps borrowed, from the church steps 3 miles back. She preferred to think of it as borrowing from a god who had stopped listening to her prayers somewhere around the Kansas border. Her wedding dress was a ruin. The hem dragged through mud and manure as she stepped into the barn, the once white silk now the color of old dishwater. The bodice was tight enough to make breathing a struggle. She had tried to unlace it while walking, but her fingers refused to cooperate. They kept remembering the moment she had stood at the altar, waiting while the entire congregation watched the door. Waiting for a groom who never came. Waiting until the whispers started and someone finally said what everyone was thinking. He had taken her dowry and disappeared into the territories. She was a fool for believing a man she had known for only 3 weeks could love her. The barn smelled of sickness, not the clean scent of hay and horses, but something sour and desperate. Mercy lifted the lantern higher. A mare lay on her side, flanks heaving, eyes rolled back white. 2 calves were penned together, their breathing shallow and rapid. A dog curled in the corner, ribs showing through matted fur, too weak even to lift its head. She had nowhere else to go. The boarding house in town had turned her away when she couldn't pay, and her aunt's letter had been chillingly clear. There was no room for a disgraced niece. The wagon driver who had brought her this far had dumped her belongings at the crossroads, mentioning that the Bridger Ranch was hiring. But when she had knocked on the main house door, a housekeeper had looked her up and down and told her they didn't need help from someone who couldn't even keep a husband, so she had walked. And when she saw the barn, she had simply stepped inside because it was better than standing in the cold in a wedding dress with nowhere to go. The mare made a sound, low and terrible. Mercy set the lantern down and knelt beside her, the wedding dress pooling in the straw. She placed her hand on the horse's neck. The skin was hot and dry, fever. She had seen it before back when her mother was alive and they kept goats and chickens in Ohio. That was before her father died, before the debts came, and before she was desperate enough to answer an advertisement from a man she had never met. The mare's breathing shifted under her touch, growing slower and deeper. Mercy kept her hand there and closed her eyes. She didn't pray, she just listened. Her mother had taught her that animals spoke if you were quiet enough to hear. Sickness had a rhythm, and health had another. If you could hear the difference, you could sometimes tip the balance, Edie. She didn't hear the barn door open or the footsteps in the straw. She didn't realize she wasn't alone until a man's voice cut through the dark. "Who the hell are you?" Mercy's eyes flew open. She pulled her hand back and turned, still kneeling. The man standing in the doorway was tall enough that he had to duck under the frame. He was broad across the shoulders, filling the entrance. He wore no hat, his dark hair disordered as if he'd dressed in a rush. His shirt was half-buttoned, his jaw unshaven. He held a rifle, not aimed at her, but not exactly lowered either. "I asked you a question," he said. Mercy tried to stand, but the wedding dress tangled around her legs and she stumbled. He didn't move to help. He just watched with eyes that gave nothing away. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice smaller than she wanted. "I didn't think anyone would mind. You just needed to break into my barn?" The door was open. "That doesn't make it yours." She finally got to her feet, bunching the skirt in her hands to keep from tripping. "I'll leave." "You're wearing a wedding dress." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Yes." "It's 4 in the morning." "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment, then looked past her at the mare. His expression sharpened. He leaned the rifle against the wall and crossed to the horse in 3 long strides, kneeling where Mercy had been. He placed his hand exactly where hers had rested. "She was worse an hour ago," he said. It wasn't quite an accusation, but it wasn't neutral either. "I didn't do anything," Mercy insisted. "I just sat with her." He looked up at her. His eyes were gray or perhaps green. The lantern light made it hard to tell. You just sat with her? Yes. And she got better? Don't know enough. I can hear when something is wrong, sometimes, with animals. My mother could do it too. He stood up slowly, looking at her with something closer to calculation than suspicion. The calves, he said. Can you hear what's wrong with them? Mercy turned toward the pen. The two calves were huddled together, their breathing fast and uneven. She walked over, aware of how ridiculous she must look in a mud-stained wedding dress with her hair falling out of its pins. She knelt and reached through the slats, placing her palm on a calf seat. The sickness here wasn't fever, it was in the gut. They need to move, she said. They need to walk, even if they don't want to. And they need water with salt in it, just enough to taste. That's it? That's what I can hear. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Wait here. He left the barn. Mercy stayed by the pen, her hand on the animal, feeling its breathing start to even out. She didn't know if he was coming back or fetching someone to throw her off the property. She was so tired that the straw looked like a reasonable place to sleep. He returned with a bucket and a tin of salt. Without a word, he mixed the water and opened the pen. The calves didn't want to stand, so he pulled them up one at a time. Mercy slipped into the pen to help, holding them steady while he got them on their feet. They walked in slow circles, and after a few minutes they both began to drink. The dog, Mercy said once the calves were settled. He's starving, but there's something else, something in his leg. Holt looked at the dog in the corner. He's been limping for a week. I thought it was age. It's not age. She crossed to the dog and knelt. The animal barely lifted its head. She ran her hand down its front leg until she felt it, a swelling just above the paw, hot and tender. The dog whimpered. There's something in there, a thorn maybe, or a piece of wire. It's infected. The man knelt beside her. Up close, he smelled of wood smoke, soap, and cedar. He took the dog's paw in his large, surprisingly gentle hands. I'll need to cut it open. I can hold him. He gave her that same calculating look, then nodded. He brought a knife, clean cloth, and a bottle of whiskey from the house. Mercy held the dog's head in her lap, whispering to him while the man worked. His hands were steady. He made one quick cut, and a piece of wire came out with a rush of infection. The dog yelped once, then went still. They stayed there for a moment, kneeling in the straw with the dog between them. The lantern was burning low, and outside the sky was turning gray. Why were you at the altar? The man asked. Mercy looked down at the dog. Because I believed someone. And he didn't come. So you walked into my barn. So I walked into your barn. He stood up and offered his hand. His palm was calloused and warm as he pulled her to her feet. I'm Bridger, Holt Bridger. This is my ranch. Mercy Ashford. You need a place to stay, Mercy Ashford? She looked at him, at the gray-green eyes, the unshaven jaw, and the barn around them where the animals were finally breathing easier. Yes, she said. Then you can stay. The housekeeper, Mrs. Calloway, did not approve. Her mouth thinned when Holt brought Mercy into the kitchen. Her eyes traveled over the ruined wedding dress and the mud on Mercy's hands. She'll need a room, Holt said. The only spare is the one off the kitchen, Mrs. Calloway replied. It hasn't been used in years. Then clean it, Mrs. Calloway. The housekeeper's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Holt turned to Mercy. You'll work for your keep. The animals need tending, and there's more sick stock in the north pasture. Half the herd has something I can't figure out. If you can do what you did this morning, you'll earn your place. I'll do what I can, Mercy said. That's all I'm asking. He left, and Mercy was alone with Mrs. Calloway's disapproval. I'll thank you not to make trouble, the woman said. Mr. Bridger is a good man, but he's been alone a long time. He doesn't need complications. I'm not a complication, Mercy met her gaze. I'm just someone who needs work. In a wedding dress. I'll change as soon as I have something else to wear. Mrs. Calloway sighed and pointed toward the storage room. There are clothes left by the last girl. They might fit. The room off the kitchen was small and dusty, but the cottonwork dress Mercy found didn't smell like failure. She folded her wedding dress and put it at the bottom of a trunk. She didn't think she would ever want to wear it again. By the time she returned to the kitchen, a hot breakfast was on the table. Holt came in, now shaved and buttoned. The mare's standing, he said. The calves are better and the dog ate. I'm glad. He looked at her over his coffee cup. How long have you been able to do that? Hear what's wrong with them? Since I was a child, my mother taught me to listen. And your mother? Dead 5 years now, fever. And your father? Dead longer. He borrowed money he couldn't pay back. His heart gave out before the bank could take the house. Holt was quiet for a moment. The man who left you at the altar, you know where he went? West, I assume, with my money. Everything I had, my mother's jewelry, my father's savings. I thought it was enough to start over. I was wrong. You could report him. There's law out here, even if it's thin. And say what? That I gave my money to a man I barely knew because I was desperate. That's not a crime, that's just foolishness. Holt set his cup down. It's not foolishness to want a future. There was something in his voice that sounded like understanding. North pasture is a mile out, he added. I'll take you in the wagon. The north pasture was worse than the barn. 20 head of cattle were showing signs of lethargy and labored breathing. 2 had already died. Mercy walked among them for an hour listening. It's not disease, she said finally. It's poison. Something in the grass or the water. You need to move them. I've grazed this pasture for 3 years, Holt countered. Then something changed. A new growth in the grass or the water's been tainted. I'm sure of it. Holt nodded. Then we moved them. They spent the rest of the day driving the herd to the other side of the ranch. By sunset, Mercy's body ached, but the cattle were safe. She had done something useful, and that was enough. The days fell into a rhythm. Mercy woke before dawn to check the animals. The mare, Sable, started nickering when she approached, and the dog, Reno, followed her everywhere, even Mrs. Vintasho. Calloway began to thaw, teaching Mercy how to bake bread the way Holt liked it. He's different since you came, Mrs. Calloway said one evening. Lighter, he smiles more. He used to go days without a word. But the peace was interrupted 3 weeks later when a carriage arrived. Isabel Thorne, a woman in a dress that cost a fortune, swept into the house. From the kitchen, Mercy heard her sharp voice. You cannot keep living like this, Holt, alone with a housekeeper and some abandoned bride. People are talking. Let them talk. Holt's voice was cold. They're saying she's living in your house, that she's... Careful, Isabel. I'm only thinking of your reputation, she said, her voice turning sweet. We were good together once. I know I made mistakes when I left, but I'm here now. I'm asking for another chance. Mercy didn't wait for the answer. She slipped out to the barn and buried her face in Reno's fur. When Holt found her, he looked at her with his hat in his hands. Isabel and I were engaged 5 years ago, he explained. She left me a month before the wedding because she couldn't be a rancher's wife. Now she's a widow, and she thinks... He shook his head. It doesn't matter what she thinks. People are talking about me, Mercy said. I don't want you to regret letting me stay. He reached out and touched her cheek. The only thing that would make me regret it is if you left. You matter to me, Mercy, more than just for the animals. The moment was shattered when a ranch hand shouted about trouble in the east pasture. A neighbor named Crenshaw was trying to stampede the herd through a fence to seize the land. Holt rode into the chaos, but there were too many cattle. Mercy didn't hesitate. She saddled Sable and rode straight into the pasture. She began to sing, a low, wordless melody her mother had used to calm runaway livestock. The led steer slowed, then stopped. The herd settled. Holt looked at her in awe. "You saved the herd." That night, Isabel Thorne left the ranch for good, but 2 days later, Marshal Pruitt arrived with a warrant. "Theft and fraud," the marshal said. "A Mr. Gerald Ashford filed charges, says you stole his money and fled." "He's the one who stole from me," Mercy cried. But Gerald had witnesses Isabel had bought. Mercy was taken to a cell in town. Holt followed, promising to get a lawyer. While she was locked away, Isabel visited her, offering a deal. "Leave the territory and the charges disappear. Stay and I'll ensure you spend 5 years in prison. I have the money, the connections, and a judge who owes me a favor." When Holt returned, Mercy told him everything. "She has everything and I have nothing," she sobbed. "You have me," Holt said. "I've been half alive for 6 years, Mercy. Then you walked into my barn and everything changed. I am not losing you." The next morning, the cell door opened. The charges had been dropped. Holt had gone to the judge and exposed Isabel's scheme. He had also found the hotel clerk who saw Gerald flee on the wedding morning. He had turned the tables, threatening Gerald with charges of fraud and abandonment. They rode back to the ranch in silence. That night, Holt found her in the barn with Sable. "I need to know," he said. "If you had a choice, if you could go anywhere, would you stay?" "Yes," Mercy said, "because this is the first place I've ever felt I belonged. Because when I'm with you, I don't feel like someone who was left at the altar. I feel like someone who was found." Holt pulled her close and kissed her. "Marry me, not because you need a home, but because I love you. I want to build a life with you." 3 months later, they were married in the small-town church. Mercy wore a simple blue dress. As Holt slipped the ring onto her finger, she thought of the ruined white silk in her trunk and the long, desperate walk that had led her to a crooked barn door. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The frontier was still wild and the work was still hard, but she was no longer alone. She was loved. And every animal that breathed again under her touch was a reminder that broken things could heal and that even the most lost soul could find its way home. This story was brought to you by Dust and Heart Western Tales.